David, hi, this is David with ArtisanRevere. Thank you very much for your order. My team and I sincerely appreciate it. We work hard to make every knife our best knife. So you are actually going to be our first customer to receive our brand new packaging. I'm excited for you to get that. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like the packaging, but more importantly, I hope you really like the knife. This video has two parts. So part one, I'm going to give you our 8 tips to making sure that your knife lasts forever. And then part two, I'm going to do a quality control inspection. Obviously, we have a tremendous amount of QA and QC in place throughout the entirety of our chain, but I like to put hands on every single knife prior to shipping. So I'm going to do that for you, and I'm going to show you some of the things that I care about, that I inspect prior to shipping out your knife. So let's get into it. I have a little checklist here to make sure I don't forget anything. There are 8 steps to making sure your knives last forever. So step number 1 is use your knife for food and only food, and primarily and frankly, ideally, non-frozen food. These blades are thin behind the edge, so your blade is approximately 12/1000ths of an inch thin, plus minus a half a thou behind the cutting edge. That's thin. This is not meant to break down, well, it's a paring knife. I assume you're going to use it primarily for fruit and peeling, peeling corn, peeling an apple, hulling a strawberry, etc. So use it for that. You can, if you want, if you're good at sharpening, you're more than welcome to use it to break down boxes. If you'd like to test the edge retention of the Elmax, I can assure you it is superb. But if you want to do some hemp rope cutting, you can do that as well, but obviously that will dull the blade quicker than just using it on food. Like I said, if you're good at sharpening, that's great. We're going to go into honing in just a minute, honing and sharpening in a little bit, but again, primarily use it for food. If you like to sharpen, then go ahead and use it on whatever you're comfortable using it on. You're going to want to wash and dry this blade immediately after use. That's very important. Leaving either a solution of acid or sodium chloride solution on the blade for an extended period of time will cause minor patination. In other words, create a patina. It is difficult to corrode and force corrosion on Elmax, but it is possible. If you leave it in a strong sodium chloride solution for hours, it will potentially have some corrosion. That's why we recommend washing and drying immediately. You can definitely get away with not washing and drying right away, but those are important. Drying especially is important, especially if you're going to store it in the leather sheath. We recommend storing your knives in leather sheaths as long as they are dry. Remember, moisture is the enemy of steel, and leather retains moisture. So if you're going to use the leather sheath for storage, make sure you dry it out. I'm actually going to get back to that in a second. But anyways, suffice to say, wash, dry, use soap. Next, treat your blade with food-grade mineral oil. So every so often, just pop a drop of food-grade mineral oil. You can buy this at Target. You can buy this online for a couple bucks. This was Alexa off. Apologize. For a few dollars. It's great for the handle. It keeps the handles really, really vibrant. It's also, food-grade mineral oil is also superb for any sort of wood you have in the house, cutting boards, and it's great for stainless steel as well. It's important to use the right cutting board. So we recommend 3 types of wood: plastic and a synthetic rubber. So in terms of wood, maple, cherry, walnut, all superb. Maple has a higher Jenka hardness, which means it's going to more rapidly dull your edge. That's fine. Those cutting boards are a little bit less expensive. You're just going to be sharpening your blade a little bit more frequently. Walnut and cherry are just about right. Plastics are great. Soft plastics in particular are great for fish, poultry, and other animal proteins. The reason for that is you can throw them into the dishwasher after. You should not throw anything made out of wood into a dishwasher unless that manufacturer specifically says it's okay, but just a good rule of thumb, avoid putting any wood in the dishwasher. So wooden cutting boards especially are not suited for animal proteins. Synthetic rubber is great as well. That's really good for folks who use a slicing notion. It's not great for people who do a lot of chopping. The reason is the synthetic will scar up pretty quickly. This is primarily geared towards chef knives, but it's a good tip to have. So why don't I show you with our prototype knife? Sorry, I've got a few other knives to get through today. This is a prototype knife. This is the cutting edge. This is the spine. When you're cutting, chopping, whatever, you don't want to scrape with the cutting edge and then transfer your food. We recommend one of two alternatives. Number one is purchasing a bench scraper. You can get one of these for $10 on Amazon. When you're done chopping, you simply take your food, scrape it, and place it wherever it's going. This is great because it has a lot of surface area, so you can get a lot of food onto it for your transfer. Or the alternative is, after you're done chopping, flip the blade over upside down and use the spine of the blade to scrape and then transfer your food. The reason is the spine of the blade is very thick, it's very strong, it's very durable, whereas the cutting edge is obviously much less durable. It is still incredibly durable, just to be clear, but it is 12 thousandths of an inch thick, 1/16 of an inch behind the cutting edge. It is not the ideal instrument for food transfer. Okay. And if you have German knives or French knives or frankly any other knife, with the exception of Japanese knives, let's leave those aside for a second, any softer steel blade has the potential to roll. The edge itself can roll. Our blade will not roll, our edge, will not roll, but it's still deleterious to the structural integrity of the edge, so it's better to just use the spine. You never want to use the dishwasher. Oh, actually, one second, I want to get back to Japanese blades really quickly. Japanese blades tend to be very brittle if they are made in the style that the Japanese are known for, which is extremely thin blades. So ours is 12.5 thousandths of an inch thick behind the cutting edge. Just so you have a sense, that's between 3 and 4 human hairs thick. The blade that we strive to emulate in terms of cutting prowess is a blade by Takamura. Those can go down as low as 6.5 to 7 thousandths of an inch thick. That's 2 human hairs thick. They are referred to as lasers because they are so incredibly thin, but unlike a laser, they're incredibly brittle, which is the problem. So what we spent almost a year and a half developing was a blade that is much sturdier, but cuts with, we've tested at 98% of the cutting ability, which is a term that describes how well the blade actually cuts and moves all the way through food. So we're at approximately 98% of the cutting ability of a Takamura laser, which is half as thin as our blade. That took a lot of engineering work. Suffice to say, this blade, you do not want to put this blade, you do not want to be transferring food with this blade. And then back to the Japanese blades, I apologize, I sort of deviated or diverged for a second there. The Takamura blades and some of the other super thin Japanese blades are really bad for scraping on the cutting edge. You will absolutely destroy those knives. They're really not meant for the Western style of cooking. They're meant exclusively for slicing, really for sushi and foods like that. They're not meant to go through, for instance, Brussels sprouts, which often have little rocks in them and so on. That'll absolutely destroy one of your Japanese blades. This will hold up to it. That's one of the things that we spent a tremendous amount of time on, was ensuring that it was both incredibly tough and had superb cutting ability. And that's one of the reasons why we use Elmax steel, because it gives us the best of both worlds. And if we're looking at it on an XY axis, we're able to pull out further on the XY axis in terms of both toughness and cutting ability. Super. You never want to use a dishwasher. Super important. It's going to pull all the moisture out of the handle. It's going to pull the epoxy out of the handle, so our handles are held together by two things. Number one are the pins, and number two are the scales, is the epoxy between the scales. You will melt the epoxy in one dishwasher cycle, and you will significantly reduce the structural integrity of the handle. Avoid the dishwasher at all costs. Aside from that, it's also 200 degrees in there. It's incredibly abrasive. It's really, really bad for your cutting edge. Nothing good could come from putting your blade in the dishwasher. That's why we said earlier, wash and dry by hand. The ideal way to store a blade is on a knife magnet. So you can buy a really good magnet on Amazon for $30, $40. The way they work, let's say this bench scraper is a magnet. You would place the blade spine first and then roll it down onto the magnet. And then to remove it, you twist it again, and you remove it this way. So your cutting edge is never coming into contact with the magnet. Super, super important. The steel on steel is never good. You want to always, you only want to use your cutting edge on food. That's it. It should never come into contact with anything else. The other place that I personally store all of my knives, I store them all in leather sheets. Remember I said earlier, leather retains moisture. That's why it's incredibly important to dry them completely. If you're not confident that you're going to dry the knife completely, which frankly you should be, it shouldn't be a concern. Two ways to improve upon that are to use hot water. Hot water as opposed to warm or cold water will evaporate much more quickly, so when you're drying it, you can be more confident that the blade will be dry. That's number one. And then number two, you can put a drop of food grade mineral oil on the blade. That's going to add a protective coating that'll sort of fortify the free chromium layer and ensure that nothing is going to penetrate it at all. And then finally, daily maintenance and sharpening. So honing is a process that if you're a professional cook, I'm sure you're already familiar with it. Most of our home cooks don't hone quite as frequently. I fall into that category myself, despite the fact that I make knives. Now, there are multiple ways to hone. The simplest is to get a honing rod. There are two primary styles of rod. One is a steel rod and the other one is a ceramic rod. I would strongly advise you not to use a steel rod for several reasons. First of all, these often have ridges, which if you have minor chipping in your blade, you're going to potentially significantly increase the size of that chip, which you really don't want to do, obviously. Now, Elmax steel is a third generation powder steel. It's an incredibly homogeneous carbide structure and microstructure. So the likelihood of creating a fissure that grows in the steel is incredibly low. But nevertheless, it's really, really much better to use a ceramic rod. I'm going to show you how to use the ceramic rod. They're smoother, by the way, obviously. So a lot of cooking schools will teach it like this. You place the rod, or you hold the rod out like here, and then you do this. We don't like this method for several reasons. Number one, very often you're cutting into the rod. This is a thin edge. It's really suboptimal to do that. And the other two reasons are you're going to have poor angle control, which is very important in terms of sharpening. And then also, if somebody's walking in front of you, there's a possibility that you'll snag that person. Butchers often will go in. We don't like this method either because almost always you're going to miss like the back inch of the blade. This is actually a pretty important part of the blade. A lot of professional cooks will peel various foods with that portion of the blade. We don't like that. In addition, you have bad angle control, and then finally, and this is the worst part, there's the possibility that you'll wind up hitting the edge up against the guard here, which is, that's you're absolutely you are creating a very, very negative situation for the cutting edge every time you do that. So, what's the right way? Place a ceramic honing rod into a wooden cutting board or something, doesn't really matter what it is, but wood is great because it doesn't really move, it doesn't let it slide. Place your blade from the heel, that's the back little bit here, up against the ceramic rod, and then move it slowly, gently, and trying to maintain a consistent angle, and then switch to the other side. And I'm exaggerating the angle here just so you can see it more easily. but it's important to try to maintain a consistent angle. Now, if you're not going down and back towards you, that's totally fine. You can do it in any sort of direction you want. It's irrelevant. It is certainly easier to go down and back though, and to maintain a consistent angle that way. 3 times, 4 times before service or before cooking is all you need, and that'll help you maintain your knives